Hello everybody, it's Chits and Cats time, and today I want to talk about the ANZACs and me. I've been talking about the fact that I wanted to get lock and load ANZACs in Vietnam, and that the ANZACs were a special, if you like, military force for me, and I kind of said I was going to talk about how or why they are special to me. And I think I need to start a little before the actual event. As I was growing up, war was never remembrance. I was very surprised when I spent my first year abroad in Scotland, and people on the 11th of November started to buy poppies, and they put them into, on their lapels, and everybody, men, women, children, were running around with those poppies made of plastic, poppies made of, I don't know, some fabric. And it was this genuine idea of remembrance. We remember the men and women who have, especially on the 11th, of course, is the Armistice Day for World War I, but we commemorate the sacrifice made by the men and women who have been fighting for Britain in the armed forces. Such a thing doesn't exist in Germany at all. When I was growing up, commemorating specifically the men and women who have fought and died for Germany would never have happened. Of course, there is a very good reason for it, because obviously Germany has caused the two world wars, World War I, World War II, and this is horrible, and the aftermath is indescribable. Millions and millions and millions and millions of people, of soldiers dead, mass murder, Holocaust. There is nothing really to commemorate, and there's also nothing to really be, happy about or anything. There's nothing to be proud about, so let's not talk about this at all. Which is the case. You don't really talk about it in public. You do talk about the Holocaust. This is ever present. There are very many commemorations of that. There are also places that you can go to. You can go to concentration camps where you then get the relevant information. But this idea of thinking of the soldiers of your own nation, who are also, if you like, victims of the conflict, of the armed struggle, because mostly soldiers don't choose to go to war. In a situation of war, they're either conscripted or they're in the army already, and they just get sent. And way back when, if you then decided not to go, you were shot, so you didn't really have a choice. So that was the first time in 1995 that I came to view or to think about how soldiers are seen also as victims of the conflict, as people that have suffered because of the conflict and whose memory should be kept alive, So Germany, when I was growing up, was a very anti-militaristic West Germany. East Germany was always different. East Germany was very militaristic, but West Germany wasn't. Every man at the age of 18 was eligible for 2 years of service in the armed forces, and they were conscripted. They had to go. It was only in the 70s that they were able to conscientiously object, but then they had to do, I think, 30 months of civil service where they had to go to I don't know, work in old pensioners' homes and stuff like that. So that service was longer, and it was also usually quite stupid work that they had to do, which was designed for them to find it really unattractive, that they would instead join the armed forces. The idea behind this was that they wanted to move away from an army which, especially during the time of the Kaiser, and then of course during the time of the National Socialists, was pretty much a state within a state. So they wanted to ground the new military which Germany had after the Second World War, West Germany had after the Second World War, in society. And you do this by making sure that every single male citizen has to join the armed forces for a period of time, so that they know what it's like, that it's not maybe turned into a haven for the militaristic nut jobs who just want to dream of burning the world down a third time. They really wanted everyone to have a part in this, to ensure that it's not turned into a sectarian movement. Okay, which makes sense. I mean, there is nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, people detested the army. Most people didn't like the army. There was a trial once where somebody was tried for saying every soldier is a potential murderer. Not killer, but murderer. Now, in German, the word murder, which is murderer, always carries the distinct stigma of you do it with intent, you know exactly what you're doing, there is no unequivocal thought in anybody's mind what your motive is. You do it because you want to kill people. It's not manslaughter, it's not accidental, it's not something, a spur of the moment thing, it's well planned. And by making a person into a soldier, you're training them to be a murderer, not a killer, a murderer. And each soldier or each person who goes along with this is a potential murderer, because as soon as they enter the field of battle, they are murderers. And of course, we know in international law that soldiers are not murderers. If you are in the armed forces of your country and you enter into a conflict, even if you lose, you cannot be tried for actually taking part in that conflict. There are still criminal acts of war, of course, we know that, but just being a soldier in the field doing a soldier's job is not a crime. But this person said, well, they're all potential murderers, which means they're all potential criminals. And he was tried and he was acquitted. The highest German court said, that's freedom of speech. If that's how he feels about it, we don't say if he's right or wrong. We just say this is freedom of speech. And there was a huge outcry amongst some people of the conservative spectrum, but the rest is pretty much okay with that. So that is the attitude that was prevalent at the time when I was growing up towards the military in very many, or in a large section of society. I would say in the larger section of society by far. And I think it was also a counter-reaction very much to, of course, what happened during the Second World War, but also looking back further to the First World War, because in the leading up to the First World War, in the Kaiserzeit, of course, the military was also led by the members of the aristocracy. People really, if they wanted to become successful, they had to serve. It was very important. And the military was looked upon as the be-all and end-all of all things. And of course, that was because the Kaiser was the top leader of the military, and he was Kaiser Wilhelm II was a very, 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 very military person. He was also not necessarily the sharpest pencil in the box, because obviously he single-handedly, more or less, plunged the world into the First World War in terms of he had no diplomatic finesse whatsoever. Bismarck realized that after the unification of Germany into the Kaiserreich, because up until then, in the 19th century, Germany didn't really exist as a nation. There were small states, kingdoms even. Bavaria was a kingdom of its own with a very, very old monarchy. Basically then the Kaiserreich was formed, the whole of Germany came together, but he realized that this was going to be quite dangerous for Germany, because Germany, when you look at it geographically, is bang smack in the middle of everything. So first of all, people might feel threatened. There is this huge unified mass of people, rich as well. I mean, there was a lot going on in Germany. You had coal, you had military power, you had, to a large degree also, agricultural power. So it was a nation to be reckoned with. And he thought that this could be perceived as a threat, especially by France. You know, Napoleon wasn't really very popular in Germany, and so there was this old enmity. And he was like, okay, well, we need to ensure that Germany is grounded within Europe, and we need to ensure that people don't feel threatened by us, but we also need to ensure that nobody else allies against us. So he formed all of these alliances with the different powers, you know, with France, with Russia, with everybody. And then Kaiser Wilhelm II came to power, and he had all things in his favor. He could have continued this path of Bismarck's. And he also had blood on his side, because he was, of course, the grandson of Queen Victoria. He was the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He was the cousin of the English king. So these three major powers were allied with him by blood. I mean, when you look at pictures of him and the Tsar, for example, they look so much alike. I mean, even the likeness is striking. They look. I remember seeing a picture once, and I wasn't able to tell them apart because they had actually switched uniforms. So Wilhelm II was wearing a Russian military uniform, and his Russian cousin was wearing Nikolaus was wearing a Prussian uniform. You couldn't tell them apart. They looked identical. So this should have given him, you know, all the things you need for a peaceful alliance with the world. There had been alliances already. He was related to them by blood. Blood was still very important. I mean, Victoria and her husband, Bertie, tried to, they had made the decision to basically send their children out into the world, marry them to the big royal houses to ensure, you know, peace. That's what they had tried to do. I mean, they had failed, but, you know. And he manages to destroy all of that. So that at the end of the day, the only alliance that we still had as Germans was with Austria. So it had all fallen apart. And he had made it fall apart. I mean, let's face it, he had made it fall apart. He had decided to build this fleet, which of course Britain could not tolerate. I mean, that was absolutely clear. I mean, by doing this, he was threatening them quite clearly. And then, of course, you know, we all know what happened. It ended in the First World War, which led to millions and millions and millions of dead people. I mean, you know, the trenches, everything. And then, of course, about 21 years later, the Second World War happened. So basically, that is the history of war in a nutshell in the 20th century in Germany. So basically, this isn't really very much that you would like to commemorate. You would think about it with a warning, a big warning sign saying never again, you know. But what you, of course, then don't do is you think about the non-military victims. That's what the focus is on, or was on, in Germany. So fast forward to 2004. 2004, I went to New Zealand for the holiday of a lifetime. And 2004 in February, March time, was arguably, according to the sources, one of the worst summers in New Zealand ever. There was torrential rain. Well, and I have to say from the very beginning, I didn't mind. I mean, I was a tourist. I was not really affected by it, but I mean, I didn't lose my car in the floods. My home was in Germany. You know, it's not like my house got swept away by the floods. It was horrible for the people living there, but I, as a tourist, wasn't even mildly inconvenienced. It just meant that a couple of roads were completely impassable, so we couldn't go south. We had to wait. So we were in a hotel near Mount Ruapeo, And basically we were supposed to drive south towards the ferry to the South Island, and the roads were blocked. So basically we were standing there in line on a road, and this huge Maori park ranger comes to every single car, and he speaks to them and says, well, unless you're a truck, and then he looks at your car and kind of goes, which you are not, you can't pass at the moment. The roads are completely blocked, but we believe that the waters will subside, and so possibly after about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there will be a way across, and you can continue your journey. So it's like, okay, it was, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning. So what do you do between 10 and 3? You kind of sit there in your car. I mean, that's, that would have been an inconvenience, a mild inconvenience, but it wasn't really bothering me either. So basically we were sitting in the car, and I looked around and I said, look, there's a museum over there. It was really strange. We were on this road near Mount Ruapeo, where there is a national park there, and there was a museum. And I said, let's go to that museum. Let's check out this museum. So it said, it's I don't really know what it's called. I think it's the New Zealand National Memorial of War Museum. So it's a war museum. It says so on the front door. And I was like, okay, so war museum. That's, something that I'm not used to, that we'd never seen before, because you don't find those things in Germany. There are no war museums. So we went in because we had 5 hours that we had to kill. We had to do something. It was raining. You couldn't stand outside. The car, is a confined space. You may want a cup of tea, so you just go in there. And it was a very interesting, very, very interesting, but most importantly, very moving experience. And I'd never seen anything like it before. It was the story of the ANZACs, and especially the New Zealand part of the ANZACs. Of course, we were in New Zealand at the time, and their history through the wars that they had been fighting. And they had a huge, and the way it's presented is you have videos, audiovisual shows, you have displays, and what really, and my mum was with me at the time, and it was incredibly moving, because this wasn't a museum about war. It was a museum about the people who were fighting that war, or those wars. It wasn't about, yes, there were displays where you have maps and where you have all of those arrows of the troop movements and stuff. That was all there. But it was centered around the people who are actually fighting those wars. The privates, the people in the trenches, the people who sit there tens of thousands of miles away from home in Gallipoli, really wondering, what the hell am I doing here? Why? I mean, I don't know these people. I have no problem with them. And there was this one soundbite that, how this works is they took the diaries of these people, and they basically had actors voicing their thoughts. And one was, yeah, they call me Kiwi, but I am really a Kiwi, a flightless bird on the verge of extinction, because I'm not going to survive tonight. And there was shelling going on in the distance. And it was all centered around the experiences of these people. Firsthand, there were letters there. There were the original letters. You could read them. There were diary entries that you could read that were being read to you. And that was really the first time that I had heard soldiers' voices talking about war. And that turned war into a really, this abstract construct that war is and was presented to us, turned into something really, really personal all of a sudden like that. And it made me think about, these people, and especially in the First World War, in the trenches, you go over the top, and you will fall. You will not make it. You will not make it to the other side, because losses were like 80-90%. But to go, I find that absolutely incredible that people to this day, I mean, I can't get my head around the fact that they just went. I mean, that is incredible. And you had these documents of them, and then basically, fell 2 days after he had sent this letter, died the next morning. You have all of this information there as well, and you kind of go, this is a person speaking from the brink of the grave. And it gave war a completely different face. And then I started to research this more, and I realized that in Britain there was this whole generation of war poets who had become poets during the First World War. Loads of them had died also during that war, but who had been producing these poems, which were incredible. And there is a very good book called Achilles in the Trenches, that actually looks at the connection, because of course there was the war in the Dardanelles, which is where Troy was, and there is this one poem by this soldier who died a couple of days after he'd written it, and he basically likens his struggle with the struggle of the Greeks when they are besieging Troy, and he says basically, and was it so hard, Achilles, so very hard to die? And he basically he calls down the spirit of Achilles to help him through this. And it's actually quite moving. I'm sorry about that. But that was a very different take on war, which personalized it. And I think, and I mean, this isn't just an ANZAC thing. This goes for every single soldier who has ever fought anywhere in the world. But that gave me a very different outlook on things, and it kind of makes the ANZACs special, because that was the first time that I actually heard a soldier's voice, because my grandparents died when I was very young. So, and both my grandfathers were, of course, soldiers in the Second World War, but I'd never had a chance to talk to them because they were already dead. And so that is me and the ANZACs. It's not a big story. It's not very insightful, I guess, but yeah, that's why the ANZACs have a special meaning for me. And whenever there is 11th, whenever there's Armistice Day, I always watch the commemorations and broadcast by the BBCs. Whenever the ANZACs are called out, my heart beats a little faster. Okay, so thanks very much. Bye.